Hi, and welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Today we welcome to the microphone Kevin Fukala. Kevin is with Campus Outreach, the college ministry at Second Presbyterian Church here in Memphis, Tennessee. Kevin, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, too.
You are a transplant, I believe, from Chicago. Is Chicago your home, though?
Yeah, that was my hometown. Actually, I grew up in Elgin, Illinois, so about 45 minutes from the city of Chicago.
And your position as kind of like a campus outreach pastor on staff, the college ministry, how long have you been doing that at Second Pres?
Actually, I just got hired on staff, and so my ministry is very missional. So 40 to 50 hours a week of evangelism and discipleship at the University of Memphis. And so it's very much a missional position. And obviously,
and when you say missional, what does that mean and what does that look like?
And when I say missional, I mean we're sending a staff of mission-minded people to the University of Memphis, and they're armed with the gospel, and they go there to carry out the Great Commission on that campus. And so my big thing is introducing students to Jesus, but also introducing them to his bride. And so the cool thing about being connected to Second Pres is I could say, hey, here's Jesus, and here's his bride, and really connect them in the local church. Because I think a lot of students are bouncing around church to church, Bible study to Bible study, and really if they catch wind that campus outreach is a vehicle of the local church, it's not the church, it's a vehicle of the local church, they'll really catch wind of our vision behind it of, hey, if we could get a student really connected into the local body, we could put a discipleship context around them. And then it doesn't just become about Kevin discipling somebody every week, but actually having the body of Christ around a student. And I think that's pinnacle at the age they're in.
Kevin, when you say these students are kind of bouncing around, why do you think that is? What is it they're looking for?
Well, I think a lot of students, I think back to my experience in college, and, there's a lot of idolatry. And I think it's very plain to see. I mean, I walked in at the University of Memphis to really try to catch a vision for the ministry before I even said yes to taking this position. And do you remember when Paul walked into Athens? He walked into Athens in Acts 17, and the very first verse, it's always caught me. It says that his heart was provoked as he saw that the whole city was full of idols. And I think about that as I was standing there in the university center, and I looked around and I thought, wow, it really is true. You look like what you worship. And so you have all these students, and you can almost see what their God is, the athlete God or the book smart God or the popularity God or the beauty God. And I'm armed with the gospel. I have the solution that sets sinners free. And that was the solution in Athens. It was the gospel. It was the solution for Paul in any lost place he went. And so, when I say students are bouncing around, I think they're chasing after God and all these things that they're doing. And honestly, when someone comes there with the gospel and God is moving in that situation, I think a student has a chance to see, wow, this is not God. This is a man-made God that I've made, and I'm following him, and somebody is now introducing me to the true God, and I can only know him through Jesus Christ.
Are these students receptive to learning about the true God on that? When you talk about idolatry, of course, we usually think about images of back in the Old Testament or some kind of pagan tribe in some other faraway country.
Yeah.
But you're talking about actual idols that we're serving here today in 2015.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, you look at your own life and you begin to see your idol, because even when you're following Jesus, you still will see that you have idols as well, and you have things that are pulling you away from that love. And when I look at students nowadays, and I go to the campus and I get to conversate with them, I think they're open to somebody who comes to them. If I am expecting a student to come to me, usually that doesn't happen. They have a multitude of influences around them and temptations, and the last thing they want to do is come to you. But what if I came to your turf, and I came up into your dorm room, and I came up into your area of life, and I walked into your situation, and I got to know you in that context of your life, and I began to do life with you. And then eventually, somewhere along the way, that student will let you see their idol.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you'll have a chance to say, hey, are you willing to turn away from that thing? You see, it's all good when I share Jesus with you and you don't quite know what that sin is. You know, everybody's got their sin. You know, we got our sin. Everybody's got their sin. But there's usually that one thing that if you can tell a sinner to turn away from, that's when you really know if they're following Christ.
It's kind of like that rich young ruler. There was that one
Sure.
thing. He thought he had kept all the law perfectly, but
Yeah.
Jesus pointed out there was that one thing he was not willing to give up.
Yeah, it's very true. And so I think that was very much Paul when he was in Athens.
When you talk about these relationships and going to the students, how do you initiate at first these first type of encounters? How do you do that?
Well, it's a lot of ways. From 11 to 1 o'clock in the afternoon at the University of Memphis, if you go to the University Center, there's every student you can think of in there. And so a lot of it is campus outreach has been around for quite a long time now. I think we've been at the University of Memphis for, and don't quote me on this, maybe 13 years. And so we already have a core thing going there. So we're very much plugged into the Greek life, and the Greek life, I think, is one of the areas where we thrive the most in our ministry. So having some staff guys that are totally connected in these areas already. And so if I play like a Timothy part, these are the Pauls that are already have very much influence around the campus. Students may not be comfortable with a guy like me the very first time they meet me, but if I go with somebody they know, in packs of two, that's been very good because they are already familiar with this face. So that's one way. But I think once we do sit down with a student and we actually have a chance to conversate with them, I think keeping things in an area where this student knows that I would like to enter into their life and really get to know them on their turf and really experience life with them and really see that I'd like to make an investment. I think that's been the key thing in my experience so far is, hey, walking to the ball field, going to the football practice and really actually getting to see what this student does and really take a liking in what they're doing. And it's in the context of that God's providence.
So it's really you're being incarnational in their world.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus did in our world.
Yeah.
So you're just, reproducing what Jesus did on the campus of the University of Memphis, basically.
Exactly.
Wow. We talked about coming from Chicago, your home. Were you already doing campus-type ministry in Chicago when you came to Memphis, or where did this whole journey begin for you?
I actually, it'd be probably fitting to share my story, and I think it makes a lot more sense that way. Growing up in Chicago, I actually played hockey. Hockey was my sport. Started playing hockey when I was 9, and hockey was my passion. I wanted to be a pro. I mean, up and down every day, if you would have asked me what do I want to do in life, I want to be a professional hockey player. Well, our boundaries changed in our school lines, and so I had to go to high school in a really bad neighborhood. And so I started chasing after the gang life and the drug life. And by the time I was 17, I had quit hockey, threw away all my parents' money. And to be honest with you, I wanted to impress this gang in Chicago that I was kind of running with. And so I set these guys up and robbed them in a drug deal. And the guys came and beat me to an inch of my life 2 weeks later. And I thought this was my big shot, Well, honestly, I wish I could say that, somebody came and shared the gospel with me after that, because it was on that night that my head was being slammed off the ground, and I just threw a Hail Mary prayer up to God. I said, God, if you're real, don't let me die tonight. And obviously I'm still alive. And, nobody came and shared the gospel with me after that. And so, without the revelation of the gospel, no sinner will come to Christ. And so I just kind of trudged through life doing it myself for 7 years. And where that 7-year journey brought me was to a bowling alley one night where I ended up meeting our college hockey chaplain. You see, we'd go out bowling and drink beers on Wednesday nights, and I did not expect our chaplain, of all people, to walk in that night. And he was a real nice guy. He said, probably shouldn't be out busting up the party tonight, but I wanted to at least shake hands and meet you and get to know you a little bit. And I ended up sharing my whole story with this guy. I mean, to this day, I don't know why I told him the things I told him, but now I sort of know that it was the Spirit leading all of that. Well, at the end of the conversation, he looks at me and he says, if you ever need anything, just give me a call. And he gives me his number. And no Christian has ever made themselves that available to me before. And so I took his number. Thought he was weird, but I took his number, and before he left, he said, I wasn't going to come out tonight, but now I know why I was here. And I was like, I'm not sure if I know what that means, but, I for 3 weeks, I sat on what he said. And I woke up one morning extremely hungover. I'd done some stupid things the night before, and was going to have to spend the whole rest of the day apologizing. And honestly, I wanted to die. I had this hole in my heart, and I was trying to fill it with the world. And on paper, any man would have wanted my life. I mean, the college hockey stud, I'd, made it out of the gang and drug scene and all that. Now I'm playing, college hockey again. Mom and dad are sort of happy with me, but my life was one big party, and it was just on from one sin to the next, really. And for the first time, I just realized that the world wasn't satisfying me. And so I start scrolling through my phone because I'm really just looking for someone to talk to. And I remember scrolling across these names in my phone, and I realized that I have a phone full of fake friends who are there when the party's there, but when all that's gone, they're nowhere to be found. And then I scroll across James's number, and he said, Kevin, I remember in the back of my mind him telling me, if you ever need anything, just give me a call. So I called James, and he picks up the phone. He says, Kevin, you're never going to believe this. He says, I'm passing by your apartment right now. Can I pick you up for church? I said, are you kidding me? Obviously I'd put the phone down at that point, because the last thing I wanted to do is go to church on a Sunday. But, mess around and call a churchgoer on Sunday, and that's where you're going. Well, I was in a bind now, so I said, yeah, James, go ahead, come pick me up. So I'm wondering one thing the whole way there, of course. I hope this church isn't breathalyzing, They weren't breathalyzing, but you know what they were doing? They were preaching the gospel, and I realized I'd heard the gospel before with my ears, but I'd never experienced Christ. And that day the light switch turned on, and I began to see my sin, and in the very next instance what Christ had done on my behalf. And I think God might have saved me right there, but really where I remember making a clean break was I called James 2 days later, and I said, James, I need Jesus. Plain and simple.
Wow.
The world's not satisfying me anymore. And he said, Kevin, meet me down the street at this grocery store. So I meet him down the street at this grocery store, and I've done a lot of transactions in the parking lot, but I've never done this eternal transaction. And that's the day I moved from death to life. And I've been walking with Jesus ever since. And really, I look back on my story, because shortly after that, God opened up a door for me to play professional hockey, and I got to share the gospel all over the hockey world, and that was my place of ministry. And then I had a career-ending shoulder injury when I was playing for the River Kings, and that forced me into retirement. And I realized that if God is sovereign enough to crush his own son, he's sovereign enough to break my shoulder. And he did it to call me into ministry. And so there was no saying no, and there was no turning back. And so shortly after that, I was affirmed in a local church, and I had ended up becoming a member at Second Pres as I was going through seminary at Mid-America. And it was in that time that I was offered the position to come on with campus outreach. And looking back at my story, I think, makes a lot of sense why God would be calling me to send me back into the college life, because that's where he pulled me out of the pit. So,
yeah. And you were in the pit. I mean, you were deeply entrenched in this life of gang activity and drugs, as you mentioned. And there's a lot of possibly even listeners that could relate to your story or know of people are doing the same thing, entrenched in a lifestyle like that, and yet they just keep beating themselves up and getting themselves beat up. But you came to a total bottom out place.
Yeah.
And you saw that you were totally forsaken, and the only one that you saw that was reaching their hand out to you, Kevin, was Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Now, were you playing in professional hockey in Chicago, or had you moved on to other teams?
I began my first position in minor leagues with a team called the Bloomington Prairie Thunder, and it was about 3 hours from home, so Mom and Dad got to see the first game, and of course that was a big deal. But then I played a lot away from Chicago, actually. I played in Augusta, Georgia, and Florida, and Ohio, and I was all over the place. So you get a call and you go. That's really
Right.
the name of the game in the minor leagues.
Kevin, as you've been moving now in ministry, and God's just giving you different avenues to express his kingdom, to those who are already following Christ and those who possibly are seeking and needing a relationship with him. What excites you most about what God has done in Kevin's life?
There's been a passage of Scripture that I've been reflecting on lately from Matthew 11, 25 through 30, and specifically verse 28, and I'm sure there's many listeners, too, that can identify with this as maybe they drive along in their cars or possibly are tuning in at some point. One thing about everybody is that in some way, shape, or form, every single person in this world is carrying some sort of burden on their shoulders. And to see that Jesus Christ has carried the heaviest burden of all, our sin, on himself, I think the simplicity of that and also the complexity of that continues to fascinate me, because you turn to a scripture like Matthew 28, and the call of the gospel is, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And in this exhausted, performance-based, do more mentality type of world where the burden of the world is on you, Jesus comes right into your world and he says, "Come to me. I'm the only one that can give you the rest you truly need." And how do we get his rest? Well, it's not exactly the 21st century definition of rest, because in the very next verse he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." So how do we get your rest? Take my yoke upon you. Oh, well, that's just great, Jesus. You're giving me something extra to do. But if you continue to read that, he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The Pharisees placed this heavy demand of the law on people, but they gave them no power to fulfill it. And Jesus comes in to this exhausted group of people like you and me, and he says, "Take my yoke upon you." My yoke is the only yoke that can produce rest for your soul. And so I think just the simplicity and the complexity of the gospel continues to rock me day in and day out as I think about my own sin, and I think about all this personal atonement I'm trying to make for myself, and I realize, look at the cross, because that is where the Father poured out his wrath on the Son. And why did he do it? So that we could have rest. And it's a fascinating word.
Isn't it a wonderful message and story for our lives?
Yeah.
Primarily, you deal with a lot of academic thought, I know, on the college campus.
Yeah.
What are some of the questions that you deal with young minds? You know, I mean, they're getting bombarded with atheist professors and, you know, all kinds of different cultural changes. And, you know, I mean, the college campus is a melting pot for all this.
Sure.
What are some of the questions? What are some of the challenges that you're having to deal with and answer that these millennials are crying out for and asking you about?
Well, you know, it's interesting because what we deal with at Rhodes College and what we deal at Memphis is two different animals. Rhodes College is now don't take me the wrong way for saying this, but it's a lot more intellectual campus, and so a lot of the questions you're going to get there are questions of dancing around the gospel. Really, you need to prove creation to me before I can step across that line, you know, and really questions that even if somebody could answer those for you, none of those answers you've gained from those would save you. And so I think our task is not to go to the campus and be an apologist. That's not our task. Our task is to take the gospel to the campus. And it's really funny because, like I said earlier, you know, even if a student has a ton of questions, because they have tons of them, and I have tons of them, and you probably still have tons of questions, but it's amazing that when I look at a student and I say, if you knew the answer to that question, would you follow Jesus? You know, the Pharisees constantly asked Jesus questions and try to stump him. He would always return with a question and stump them. And so I don't think I have the answers. I don't think anybody has all the answers. And so I try not to get caught up, believe it or not, in too many of the question and answer game with students. Because usually what they want...
That can become a revolving door.
It can. And usually what they want to do is dance around the gospel. Because it's funny, if you really confront somebody with their sin and you tell them that Jesus is the only way, the truth, and the life, it's really, really apparent how they've reacted to that message. Because it's either yes or no. It's either I repent and believe, or I want nothing to do with you. And so I try to get up in their worldview, find out what their idol is, and call them to turn from it, and not get involved in too many of the question-answer game, because there's many questions I can't answer.
Yeah.
You know.
How many times a week do you make a trip to either Rhodes or Memphis campus?
Well, right now I'm in the financial support raising process of my ministry. So I have to raise 100% of my support.
So even though you're on staff at Second Press, it's not a paid position.
No, and I'll tell you why. It's here's the thing, and I'll answer that other question too, but basically, so I think the best way to understand it is that we're trying to do ministry regionally and internationally. So we have 20 regions, and in all 20 of those regions, there's campuses, and there's always a hub church that runs that region. So Second Pres is the hub church of the southeastern region. And so in this region, we have campuses, and all of those campuses function out of a local church. So in the 8 campuses in the southeastern region, all 8 of those campuses function out of a local body there. Now, Second Pres is the hub church of that region. And so it's a little different, because if you're on staff at U of M, or if you're on staff at Second Pres and you're serving at U of M or Rhodes, you're at the hub church. So the hub church puts the most amount of money into the ministry administrative-wise. Well, since we've grown so big and we're regional and international, we have about 50 missionaries that are connected to Second Pres, although they're spread out around our region at the different campuses. And they serve at those campuses and are plugged into those local churches in the area of those campuses. But they have to receive financial support, because imagine if Second Pres had to fund 50 missionaries, our pastors wouldn't eat. And so that, I think if you view us more as missionaries locally, which is profound to some people, but I think if you can't minister locally, you can't minister internationally.
Yeah.
And so we raise support, and we're in-state missionaries on the campus of wherever God has called us.
So if somebody wanted to contribute financially and be part of your team, a partner with you in what you are doing on these campuses here, how could they do that?
Well, usually what I do is I have appointments with people, and that's kind of been my schedule this summer, is to meet with people in the area that really, in the Memphis area and in the Tennessee area, that really have a heart for the kingdom, and they want to invest in the Great Commission, both in their lives and in their finances.
Key thing about that too, Kevin, is the world comes to Memphis. We're talking about we're not only talking about U.S. citizens. We're talking about students from all over the world, and we're talking about a very critical age of if you can reach the hearts and minds of these young people, in their 20s.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my goodness, the potential and the possibility for the kingdom of Christ. So partnering with you would be truly an investment in his kingdom.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I always tell people that I meet up with is, like Dave Sitton said last week. He said, I need a bunch of businessmen to make a ton of money and die to it.
That in itself is a very challenging and sobering thing to think about. Yeah. But we're called to make just total sacrifice, total surrender for a better, higher cause, which is Christ's kingdom, Christ's work being known here in this earth.
Yeah, and I think whenever I meet up with somebody and I'm able to, well, first of all, I'm meeting up with people that are like-minded, and so they already have a mind and a heart for the kingdom of God. But I think everybody along the way realizes that in some way, shape, or form, they're trying to build their own kingdom. And when you call somebody to be a part of his kingdom, it's an excitement, because it gives them a chance to not only turn away from their kingdom, but to turn to his kingdom and say, I'd like to give my money because it's going to advance the gospel. And it's laying up treasure in heaven. Yeah. And so a lot of the way I deal with is I like to sit down face to face with somebody and really have a chance to break bread with them or have a cup of coffee with them and really share my vision and financial goals with them, so that they see what they're giving to, so that they see that they're given to something that is truly eternal. And the gospel will go forth without their giving or not. And that's what I take heart in, is that God is my provider. But I think he has already hand-selected the people that he would like to steward his resources. So he is the owner, and they're the manager. And so if they'd be willing to steward his resources in a way that, honestly, I can't at this point, without the help of supporters like them, I cannot be on the campus 40 to 50 hours a week doing what I do. And they also can't be on the campus 40 to 50 hours a week. So somebody's got to be a sender and somebody's got to be a goer. And so you'll either die to, so like Dave Sitton, I keep going back to what he said. He said this last week. He said, there's two ways you can be a martyr. You can die as a giver, or you can die as a giver and a sender, or you can die as a goer. And so really it's what has God positioned you to be at this point in time of your life?
If what we're sharing today is pulling on some people's hearts and they really believe in the story here and want to partner with you, how can they maybe set up a time to go have that cup of coffee or have that sandwich at lunchtime with you? How can they do that?
If you're listening and you're interested in anything that I've said and you'd like to sit down and hear my vision and financial goals, and truly be a part of something eternal, you can email me at lowercase.kevin.fukala@campusoutreach.org and set up shoot me an email, and I'd love to sit down and get to know you and really and see where God leads that.
And Fukala is spelled Fukala.
Yes.
Make sure we say that.
Yep, Fukala.
Fukala.
Yeah.
Kevin Fukala, thank you so much for what you are doing for Christ's Kingdom here on the campuses of Rhodes and University of Memphis, and as the network of a greater outreach on other campuses, throughout our nation, and the partnership that you share with the gospel. Thank you for sharing your story with our Bot Radio Network friends today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Do appreciate you stopping by. I'm Byron Tyler. Hey, we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.